Hey guys, Philosophios here. I'm just going to make a video on the build that I came up with here. It's been doing really well for me in the higher Torment. Torment 3 is pretty quick, doesn't feel slow, and the elites just take a few seconds. Basically it's just a variation of my previous spec. The previous one is not very gear dependent, this one however is. Once I got some good items, I was able to swap out some abilities and give the build more synergy. So previously I was able to cast a lot less clusters per cycle, and the cycles were a lot harder to maintain. Now that I have certain items working together, the synergy is just really good. This is one of the highest synergy builds I've come up with at this point. It's like every ability is working with every other ability in some way, and the items are also working together in with the build. So I'm going to take a few minutes to go through the spec and the items that are good. Some of the items you're going to switch in and out depending on what you're doing. The encounter that you're in, you might switch out your necklace for whatever element is causing you trouble. And the shrine bracers, throw them on when you hit a shrine, you get a free elite, chances for legendaries, and the movement speed, depending on if I'm doing Torment 1, I might go with the movement speed. If I'm doing Torment 3, 4 plus, I'm going to use the resources. So let's start by going through, actually let's start with the loot, because the loot is where it starts. So the first thing to touch base on is the Calamity Mark for Death. Whenever the level 70 Calamity hits an enemy, it uses, whenever it marks the target with the mark, it actually picks up the rune from your bar, from your spec. So depending on which one of these you have, that's going to determine what effect this weapon puts out. So when you run the mortal enemy, 4 hatred per target, I mean just a couple targets, and your hatred spenders are going to end up paying for themselves. Depending on how many targets, you're even going to generate more hatred than you spend. Now it's not exactly 1-to-1, depending on the proc coefficient of the ability. You're going to get a little less hatred, things like that. So it's not quite as crazy as you would think, because some of the high AoE abilities are going to have low proc coefficients, so they're not going to generate quite as much hatred. But either way, this is my primary source of hatred generation. You can see in the build, I don't actually have a generator at all. I'm using the mortal enemy with other abilities to generate hatred, and then I'm using the multi-shot with the suppression fire to generate discipline. And I'm using punishment to switch between discipline and hatred. So that's going to be like the core, the fundamental item. The build is not really going to function very well without this. So I'm definitely liking this new Calamity. Other items that are essential, I'm basically just going to touch on the essential items because I will have a video with the whole item, like each item individually. But again, here I'm just going to go on the ones that are supporting the build. You have the chance on hit to create the chaos field, so you'll see when I show the gameplay in a few minutes, you'll see these blue circles on the ground, and they last for 2 seconds, and there's like maybe 1 second global cooldown. And basically the way that it ends up working is when the chaos field is down, you use smoke screen. By the time your smoke screen is up, the chaos field is back. It procs so often, it's almost up all the time. Anytime it's not up, you can be smoke screen. So the monsters are either CC'd or you're invisible, pretty much. I'm running the smoke screen with the lingering fog with no cooldown reduction. So I'm not with 100% smoke screen, but I do have effectively 100% avoidance because they're either CC'd or I'm invisible, one or the other. So that's really fundamental to the build. The other one is going to be the resource shoulders are going to be very nice. It's kind of like Blood Vengeance, the passive. It gives you 40 hatred for a globe, some discipline. This doesn't restore discipline. It's the primary resource, which is only hatred for the Demon Hunter. So it only generates the hatred, but you can get to 20% on your shoulders and 20% on your bracers. So this is really strong. It's 40% of your hatred. And if you do run Blood Vengeance, the globes are just massive hatred. So if you ever have resource issues, these combination of items, Blood Vengeance, that's going to give you so much hatred. And then we have the Cinder Coat is going to be fundamental as well. It has the resource cost reduction for fire skills by 30%. And that is going to work for your cluster arrow, as well as your Trail of Cinders. So it's actually really, really strong here on the Trail of Cinders, because if you do a little bit of math, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but basically the vault with the Trail of Cinders, because it benefits from the fire reduction here, it's actually cheaper to run Trail of Cinders than it is to run Tumble if you have a Cinder Coat. So that's pretty huge there as well. Trail of Cinders is going to come in for hatred generation later as well. So, and then there is the helmet. This is the one bug that I am actually taking advantage of out of all of the bugs and all the different items that are glitched and things like that. This is the only one that I'm currently taking advantage of, and it's not really out of the realm of possibility of being effective for me either way, because of the uptime on the blind combined with the smoke screen. I usually don't take damage. Like you'll see in the gameplay, sometimes I get hit and sometimes I might get close to dying. But if I play it a certain way, I could pretty much avoid damage entirely. Between smoke screen and the blind here, it's not too hard once you get the monsters in the blind. And keeping them in the blind field is the chaos field is made easier when you have a decent Templar. So the Templar is able to use really good loot now, and they actually proc the legendary affixes on items. So you'll see again in the gameplay in a moment, whenever the monsters get pulled in, kind of like a Cyclone Strike monk, a pull monk, this is going to proc very often, and it's going to pull all the monsters around him on top of him, and it also slows them, which the blind does as well. So between his AoE pull, the Chaos Field blind, and then some other effects, he has the slow, he's got the Thunder Fury, it also procs the lightning, which slows, the Intimidate here as well. So he's got the taunt, whenever monsters hit him they get slowed, whenever he hits monsters they get slowed. So there's lots of sources of slows between the Templar and the belt. Again, the blind is slowing them as well, which is going to proc the Cold of the Weak. So there are some items, we don't actually have any movement, like any slowing impairments here to proc the Cold of the Weak, so we're using our items alone to get the slow effect to proc the Cold of the Weak. So that's key. You do need the items to be able to take advantage of that combination. Other than that, I mean, the other items are just to pick up range. This isn't really essential. It's just a nice trifecta ring stats, and then the same thing here, nice trifecta stats. The arcane immunity is quite convenient, so that definitely helps as well. It's not really fundamental to the build. The build isn't relying on these items. The Nat 2Ps is really strong. Crit damage is hard to get, so dual wielding is actually in a pretty good spot at this point. You get the double sockets, gives you 260 crit damage right there, you know, so that's a lot of crit damage. And like I said, the crit damage only rolls up to 35 now on weapons, so it's very hard to get high crit damage. It's not as easy as it used to be to break the 500, 600 crit damage mark. And you do want to end up with about that much crit damage, so dual wield definitely kind of got like an indirect buff, and as well as being balanced. So the weapons are much more balanced now. So dual wield is looking good, which I'm super happy about. And then about the loot, that's pretty much it. I mean, the ninja legs, just stats here. The Nat boots, stats as well. Yeah, so. And then the necklace, we have the trifecta lightning absorb. It's very nice as well. So that's going to do it for the loot. Now I'm going to talk about the build and how the abilities are working together. Some of them are going to be optional. You can switch them out depending on what you're doing. Obviously, tactical advantage is not necessary. I just really enjoy the movement speed, and I've become accustomed to having that, so it's hard for me to let go of that. And then, so this you could switch to anything. If you need some survivability, maybe you could go Perfectionist. If you're lacking damage on a lower difficulty, you could try to go, Ambush. It's going to help. Single out's going to help against bosses. Like if you're doing bounties, the trash is pretty easy to get. Bounty bosses might take you a little bit longer. This could help. Not the best abilities here that we have to choose from, but, and there's always archery. Got nerfed, but it's decent with the two-handers because you get the crit chance and the hatred generation, so lots of options for this one here. I go with the tactical. Again, I'm just so used to that, it's hard for me to play without it. Call the Weak, obviously, for the damage. Night Stalker for the discipline. Then Grenadier for the grenade damage and the range. So this is huge. It's going to buff your primary. The build, again, is revolving around spamming clusters, reducing the cost of the cluster to enable you maximum spammage. And, avoiding the damage, things like that. And it is a cycling build, so you are going to use your discipline to generate hatred, and you're going to use your hatred to generate discipline, and you're going to have to manage between them. And it's really, really easy if you do have the item combination that I have here. It's very easy to keep the discipline. So just real quick, I'm going to kind of do a couple little demonstrations on the resources and to show how easy it is to generate, to go from no resources to full resources in a matter of seconds. And then I'm going to show some regular gameplay. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to spend all of my hatred. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to vault once right through these monsters. And then I'm going to generate full hatred. And now how this is working, what's happening here, if you're not familiar with the Demon Hunter mechanics, you might not be catching it. So I'm going to explain it. The Calamity is pulling the mark off of your bar, putting it on all the guys. So everybody here, whenever I hit them, I generate hatred. And I might need to kill these guys. So whenever I hit them, I generate hatred. The vault with the trail is doing fire damage over time, so it's generating a lot of hatred. And then whenever you run out of discipline, so let's use up all of our discipline. So now we have no discipline. We just shoot a few multi-shots, and then we have full discipline. And it didn't even cost any hatred to do that. So again, if we're out of hatred, you just vault once through a nice group of monsters, and you have full hatred. And then if you're out of discipline, spam multi-shot, and then you have full discipline. So the multi-shot is doing really well for the generation on the resources, combined with the Calamity and the mark. So again, the mark is being pulled because of this Calamity. It has a 100% chance to mark them, and it uses the rune on your bar here, so it generates the hatred. And the trail's doing damage, proccing the mark, generating the hatred, and then the multi-shot, the suppression fire is it did get nerfed, so this used to generate 1 discipline per enemy with no max, but it's maxing out at 6 now, which I feel is fair. So it did get nerfed here, but it's still really strong. And because it's essentially free on the hatred cost, because of the mark and the Calamity, it's just discipline for free essentially. You have that combined with Night Stalker as well, so whenever you're landing crits, you're generating discipline. And, you know, if you have an excess of discipline and you're short on hatred and you're not in the position to vault under the monsters, sometimes if you're trying to drop a trail on a good, nice group of monsters, or if there's not a good group of monsters, because the trail hatred generation tactic that I just demonstrated, that's only going to work when there's a good number of monsters, like 3+. If there's only 1 or 2 monsters, you're going to need to use punishment. And this is when the Night Stalker is going to come in. So you're going to generate discipline through critical hits, and then spend your discipline on punishment to generate hatred. Because also the mark is, the more monsters there are, the more hatred you're generating. So, yeah, the single target, you're going to end up needing the punishment. And then, I've said this before, this is the kind of build where you don't use everything all the time, but there is a time where you use everything. So I'm not going to use multi-shot all the time, but if I'm like trying to run really, really long distances, I'm going to just spam vault until I'm out of discipline, and then shoot a couple multi-shots into a big group of monsters, and then spam vault some more. And it literally, with 2 to 3 attacks per second, you have to attack 9 to 10 times to get full discipline. So that's only taking like 4 or 5 seconds to cast, you know, that. So you stop for a couple seconds, you get full discipline, and then you spam vault on and on. Obviously the clusters for the damage. I feel like I'm leaving something out. You got the lingering fog, damage avoidance, crowd control, break, trail of cinders for the hatred and mobility, punishment for the hatred. It's just all hatred. You're really just maximizing your hatred generation to be able to just spam more clusters. And the key is the Cinder Coat is one of the strongest items for this build. It's got the resource reduction for both your primary damage, your primary resource generation. As far as the hatred is concerned, this is generating the most hatred. And it's also increasing the damage on your fire skills. So in my mind, this is definitely best in slot for this kind of build for the chess piece. You really want to maximize your cluster spam to get the most damage. So here we have the actual gameplay. This is T3 bounty, and you can see the resources, not an issue. Templars pull into the blind, everything's happening pretty much all the time. The blind again, and the discipline, you can watch my discipline as I'm mostly just scouting for the bounty boss and killing some trash on the way. So you can see I already completed 47 out of 50. Going ahead and finishing that out, that way I can just find him. And now we're just looking for the bounty. Spamming the multi-shot into groups of monsters to generate discipline. This one's actually pretty far out, so definitely utilizing the tactical advantage for the movement speed, and the suppression fire for the discipline generation. And then once you get to the monster, you just spam the clusters. And like I mentioned, Trail isn't doing that well against the single target, so you can see I kind of kited him into some more trash to generate more hatred with the vault. And yeah, I mean, he dies pretty quick. And then that's it. So this is another bounty here, again on T3. I got lucky and found him very quickly, so another quick bounty. Actually didn't get any kills on the way, he was so early. Landed on him. Just kind of checking my loot, make sure everything's right. For the right, what I was doing is checking to make sure I have my lightning absorb on. So he's dead. Just a few seconds there. killing some trash. I'm looking for a good density. It's almost not worth the time to stop and shoot unless you're going to get several kills. So I skip a little bit of trash, find a nice little group. You can see the pull on the Templar's necklace, proccing, pull him into the blind. Pretty much like clockwork. Every time he attacks, it happens, and they just die from the grenades. So the trash just immediately dead. A couple clusters. I mean, between the grenadier, the Call of the Week, the fire damage bonus, and the resource reduction, it's doing a lot of damage. And you have very high sustain. Survivability is not an issue. Mobility is not an issue. Damage is very nice. So, and this is not even top end gear. I do have all the appropriate items, but I'm missing a handful of random rolls. So this is quick T1 bounty. You can see the missile dampening actually amplifies the grenades. It makes all the grenades land right on them. So if you're ever up against missile dampening, just stand right on top of them and your cluster bombs will hit them all. This is T1, quick little bounty on T1. Just to show the build works on low difficulty, it works on high difficulty. The cluster is not really an issue. The fact that there's a delay, the damage is worth the wait, basically, and you don't really have to wait. You can see a lot of times I just kind of throw them out and then run away to the next group. So, doing very well. Alright guys, that's going to be it. I'll show the spec one more time. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you on the live stream. Don't forget to subscribe and like and follow the stream.